want to tell you a story about the night I found out that 14 years of my life had been filed under temporary. It started with a toast at a restaurant I helped build from nothing, and it ended with a phone call I almost didn't make. But before I get into all of that, tell me in the comments where you're watching or listening from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday evening in October, and I was standing in the parking lot of Greystone Grill on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard in Duluth, Georgia, trying to get a smudge off my dress shoes with a paper napkin. Brown wingtips. My wife had picked them out for my birthday 2 years before. She said they made me look like a man who knew what he'd built. I wore them because I believed she meant it. The restaurant was packed, every table full, soft jazz coming through the speakers, candlelight bouncing off the wine glasses. It was the grand opening of the second location, the one we'd talked about since before we got married. Louisa had been dreaming about it since the first Greystone turned a profit 4 years in. I was the one who made the numbers work. That part didn't make it into the speeches. Let me back up 14 years. I met my wife at a church potluck in Norcross, Georgia. I was 61 years old, retired from 30 years as a licensed electrician, living alone in the house I'd paid off 2 years before my first wife passed. I was not looking for anything. I showed up for the macaroni and the familiar quiet of people who didn't ask too many questions. She was 47, recently divorced, with a son in middle school, named after his absent father, and a catering side business she ran out of a commercial kitchen she rented by the hour. She brought lamb chops to that potluck. I remember thinking, this woman understands patience. You can't rush lamb chops. Her son, I'll call him by what she told me to call him, Junior, was 11 years old and spoke maybe 20 words to me in the first 6 months. He had his mother's eyes and his father's habit of looking past you when you talked, like you were a temporary piece of scenery. I didn't take it personally. Boys that age are navigating things. Grown men can't always name. Her ex-husband had been gone since Junior was 8. Not legally gone. There was a custody arrangement every other weekend on paper, maybe twice a year in practice. He lived up in Chattanooga and sent money when he felt like it, which wasn't often enough to matter, and just often enough to keep him relevant. She told me early on, it's just us now, Junior and me. We're building something real. So I built. My house was paid for, 4 bedrooms in Lawrenceville. We moved them in 8 months after we started dating. Junior got the room with a corner window he spent the first 3 weeks ignoring, and the next 3 years treating like his own apartment. I replaced the carpet in there myself. Laid it on a Thursday, didn't tell anyone, just had it done before he got home from school. I co-signed the lease on the commercial space for the first Greystone Grill. Louisa's credit was recovering from the divorce and the startup costs, and the landlord needed a name with history behind it. Mine had 30 years of it. I wasn't on the business license. She said it would complicate the LLC structure. I said, whatever you need, I meant it. I paid for Junior's orthodontist on Satellite Boulevard, 16 months of adjustments and retainer checks, and a boy who never once said thank you but also stopped hiding his smile by the time he was 14. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I drove him to baseball practice at the Gwinnett County Complex 3 evenings a week his sophomore year. Sat in the aluminum bleachers with the other parents, drank bad coffee from a thermos, watched him work on his curveball. He didn't invite me. His mother asked me to take him. I went because it was the right thing, and also because somewhere between the 3rd and 4th week he started looking for my car in the parking lot before the other parents. He got into Georgia State on a partial academic scholarship. The rest was me. Tuition, housing, a used Chevy Malibu I bought from a teacher at my old church because the bus schedule between Midtown Atlanta and his evening classes didn't make sense. The week he got his acceptance letter, Louisa cried and held my face in her hands and said, "This is what a real father does for a family." She used that word a lot. Real. I should have paid closer attention to what she meant by it. His biological father showed up for the graduation. Of course he did. Showed up in a rented Escalade he posted about on Facebook the day before, dress shirt with the top two buttons open, cologne you could smell from 15 feet. He hadn't paid a dime toward that diploma. Not one enrollment fee, not one textbook, not one tank of gas for the Malibu. But he was there with a card and a handshake, and the kind of easy grin that belongs to men who arrive after the work is done. I shook his hand that day because I am not the kind of man who makes scenes at his stepson's graduation. But I noticed things. The way Junior's shoulders went back when his father walked in. The way Louisa touched her hair. The way they took a photo together, the three of them. Biological family, and nobody turned to find me in the crowd. I told myself it was just one afternoon. I told myself Junior had a right to that moment. I went home and fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping for 2 weeks, and I didn't say a word. That was 4 years before the grand opening. The restaurant had grown. Greystone Grill on Peachtree Industrial was a real operation now. 12 tables, a private dining room in the back, a wine list Louisa had curated herself over 2 years of Saturday tastings. She had a chef named Antoine and a floor manager named Yvette, and a social media following she'd built one post at a time. The food was extraordinary. I'm not saying that because I'm biased. I'm saying it because people drove from Alpharetta and Marietta and once from Birmingham to eat there on a Friday night. I had helped finance the build-out. My name was not on the door, not on the menu, not on the website. I told myself that was fine. She was the talent. I was the infrastructure. That's how I framed it. The second location was her dream made bigger. A full bar, a private event space, a kitchen twice the size. We had talked about it over dinner for 3 years. She had the concept. I had the equity. I pulled a home equity line of credit on the Lawrenceville house, my name, and wired the funds in 2 installments, $340,000 total. The deed to the restaurant property was in her LLC's name. My financial advisor told me that was unusual. I said we're married. It's fine. He wrote something down that I didn't ask to read. The night of the grand opening, I wore the brown wingtips. I arrived early to help set up, moved chairs, adjusted lighting in the event space, made sure the sound system didn't feed back. Antoine's team handled the kitchen. I handled what nobody else was handling. That's always been my job. Guests started arriving around 7. I knew some of them, neighbors, people from our church, a few of Louisa's catering clients from the early years. I recognized faces that had been around since before the first Greystone had a sign on the building. I shook hands. I said thank you for coming. I was proud. I want to be honest about that. I was genuinely, fully proud of what we had built. At 8:30, Louisa called everyone's attention for a toast. She looked beautiful. Burgundy dress. Hair she'd spend the afternoon on. The smile she saves for the moment she wants people to remember. She talked about the journey, the catering kitchen, the first lease, the slow years, the breakthrough. She was eloquent and warm and specific in the ways that make people feel like they're being let in on something private. Then she started thanking people. She thanked Antoine. She thanked Yvette. She thanked her sister Rosalind, who'd driven down from Charlotte. She thanked Junior, who stood up from a front table in a blazer I didn't know he owned. And then she said there was one more person she needed to acknowledge. Someone whose belief in her vision had never wavered. Someone who had shown her what it meant to take a risk on something you love. I straightened up. I had the champagne glass in my hand. She said his name, her ex-husband's name. Said he had encouraged her years ago to trust herself, back when she was just a woman with lamb chops and a commercial kitchen she rented by the hour. Said his faith in her at the very beginning was something she carried with her into every room she'd built since. He stood up from a table in the back that I had not known he was sitting at, waved like a man accepting an award. The room applauded. Louisa was wiping her eyes. I was standing near the service corridor with a glass of champagne and 14 years of checks and early mornings and aluminum bleachers and one home equity line of credit that was secured against a house with my name on it. I did not throw the glass. I set it on the nearest surface. I said nothing. I walked to the parking lot the same way I'd walked in, quietly, without explanation, and I sat in my truck for 22 minutes. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't sadness that settled in. It was something older and quieter. The feeling of a number you've been carrying in your head for a long time, finally resolving itself into an answer you'd been avoiding. I drove home. The house was dark. I went to the kitchen table, the one I'd bought at an estate sale in Decatur, refinished myself over a long weekend, the one we'd eaten 14 years of dinners at, and I sat there until past midnight doing what I should have done years before. I went through the numbers, every transfer, every cosign, every line of credit, every payment toward Junior's education, his car, his apartment deposit when he got his first real job. I wrote it down on a legal pad, not for anyone else, just to see it. When I was done, I put the pen down and looked at the number at the bottom of the page for a long time. Then I went to bed. I didn't sleep much, but I was calm in a way that told me I'd already made up my mind before I lay down. In the morning, I called my attorney, David Park, Family and Real Estate Law, office on Pleasant Hill Road in Duluth. 15-year relationship. He answered because I told his assistant it was urgent. I told him what had happened. Not the toast, not the applause, not the ex-husband's wave. Just the numbers, the house, the HELOC, the LLC structure my financial advisor had written something down about. David listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You want to know your options, or do you want me to start moving?" I said, "Start moving." The HELOC was secured against my home. Her LLC had received the funds as a capital contribution, which I had documented at David's and Sisters years earlier, though I hadn't understood why at the time, as a personal loan with terms attached. There was paperwork. David had made sure of that, even when I hadn't wanted to think about it. He was that kind of attorney. I sent a formal written notice of default on the loan the following Tuesday. Certified mail to the LLC's registered address. The terms were clear, full repayment within 90 days, or we entered dispute proceedings. I also called my financial institution about the joint accounts. What was mine I moved. What was shared I documented. I didn't hide anything. I didn't need to. I just needed everything to be visible. Louisa found out on a Thursday. I know because I was sitting on the back deck watching the neighbor's dog investigate something in the azaleas when her car pulled into the driveway faster than usual. She came through the back door and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me the way people look when they've just had a conversation that rearranged something they thought was settled. "David Park called the restaurant's attorney," she said. "I know," I said. "I asked him to. What are you doing?" I turned to face her. She was still in her work clothes, the burgundy blazer she liked, silver earrings. She looked the way she always looked when she was composing herself, chin slightly up, hands at her sides. "I'm asking for what's mine to come back," I said, "the same way I sent it." She started with the words people start with when the conversation is catching them off guard. Love, family, years together, everything we've built. I let her finish. "You stood up there," I said, "in a room full of people, in a building financed by my home, and you thanked the man who sent child support 4 times in 11 years. You thanked him for believing in you. I was standing by the service corridor." She didn't have an answer for that. She tried a few. I listened to each one. "You knew this was my dream," she finally said. "I knew," I said. "That's why I funded it." She left that evening to stay with her sister Rosalind in Atlanta. Junior called me 2 days later. He was at his apartment in Midtown, and his voice had a careful quality I hadn't heard from him before, like someone carrying something breakable across a room. "I didn't know he was going to be there," he said. "At the opening. Mum didn't tell me until that afternoon." I believed him. Junior had never been a liar, even when it might have helped him. "I know," I said. Silence for a moment. She shouldn't have done that. The speech. He paused. I wanted to say something when she did it. I didn't. That landed somewhere behind my ribs. I didn't rush past it. Why didn't you? I asked. I don't know, he said. I think I was afraid of ruining the night. She already ruined it, I said, not harshly, just accurately. He didn't argue with that. You going to be okay? He asked. I'm going to be fine, I said. Better than fine. Eventually. The legal process took 4 months. Louisa's attorney was competent and careful, and there were complicated conversations about marital contributions versus documented loans versus the nature of the LLC's structure. Davy Park had spent 15 years making sure my paperwork was airtight, which meant the conversations, complicated as they were, kept arriving at the same conclusion. The court didn't settle everything I'd put in, but enough came back to matter. The HELOC balance was restructured as a legally enforceable debt against the LLC. My name was added to the property agreement with a clear equity stake. What I had built into, I now owned a portion of on paper. That felt different than I expected, not triumphant, not satisfying in the way you imagine it when you're sitting at a kitchen table at midnight with a legal pad. Just accurate. Like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally closing the way it was supposed to. I moved to a smaller place in Suwannee. 1 bedroom, a sunroom that looks out on a stand of loblolly pines, a kitchen just big enough to cook for one person who knows what he's doing. I bought a cast-iron skillet at a church thrift sale and learned to make proper cornbread for the first time in 20 years. There is a man at my Thursday evening veterans group at the American Legion on Lawrenceville Highway named Otis Beaumont. 81 years old, served in Vietnam, speaks in a register so low you have to lean in to catch it. He sits at the end of the long table and he listens more than he talks, which is how you can tell he's the one worth listening to. One Thursday, he looked at me sideways and said, "You got a lot of stillness around you lately." "I've been working on it," I said. "Stillness ain't nothing to work on," he said. "It's just what's left when you stop pretending you're fine with something you're not fine with." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. Junior and I have kept talking. Not often, but honestly. He called me in January to tell me he'd been promoted at the logistics company he works for, operations manager, overseeing a team of 12. He said it like he wanted someone to know who had watched him study. I was that person. "Congratulations," I said. "I always knew you had it." "I know you did," he said. "You were the one who showed up." That was enough. Sometimes that is enough. He also told me his father had stopped calling around the time Louisa's legal trouble started. Classic timing. The man had a gift for arriving at the celebration and disappearing before the cleanup. Louisa and I finalized the divorce in February. She did not attend the mediation in person. Her attorney came with a settlement offer that David called reasonable, given the documentation. We accepted with 2 modifications. I walked out of a conference room on Sugarloaf Parkway into a cold Georgia afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and breathed air that felt like it was mine to use, however I wanted. I've been refinishing furniture in the sunroom, old pieces I find at estate sales, a mahogany side table with a warped leg, a rocking chair that needed the joints re-glued and the finish stripped back to bare wood. There is something satisfying about taking a thing that has been mistreated by time and neglect and making it sound again. No applause for it. No toast. Just the work and the result. Some mornings I sit in the sunroom with coffee and watch the light move through the loblolly pines. I think about the lamb chops. I think about the carpet I laid on a Thursday. I think about the aluminum bleachers and the bad thermos coffee and the way a boy learning a curveball would eventually learn to look for your car in the parking lot. I think about all the rooms I walked into carrying something heavy that nobody in the room was looking for. Here is what 63 years and 14 of them spent being someone's infrastructure taught me. You can give generously without giving yourself away entirely. You can love without dissolving, And when someone uses the word real, the way my wife used it, to describe the father, the family, the foundation, pay attention to what they're calling real and what they're quietly calling something else. I was the something else. I funded the dream and stood by the service corridor while someone else got the toast. I will do that again, not because I'm bitter, because I finally understand something that should have been obvious sooner. A man who carries the weight without being named in the ceremony is not being honored. He is being managed. And the moment you understand the difference is the moment you put the weight down and walk out into the open air and decide what you're willing to carry next. So, if you've ever been the one who laid the carpet on a Thursday, who co-signed the lease, who sat in the bleachers in the rain while someone else got the graduation photo, I hope this finds you before you spend another 14 years deciding you're fine with something you are not fine with. You are allowed to name your contribution. You are allowed to put it in writing. And when the room gets quiet after the toast and your name isn't in it, you're allowed to set down the champagne glass, walk to the parking lot, and start making calls. That is not a failure of love. That is a man finally loving himself at the same volume he's been loving everyone else. Thank you for listening. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Voices of Uncle Samuel, because next time we're going to talk about what comes after the parking lot. I've been thinking lately about what Otis said that Thursday night at the Legion Hall. Stooness ain't nothing to work on. It's just what's left when you stop pretending you're fine with something you're not fine with. He wasn't talking about meditation or peace of mind or anything that belongs in a self-help book. He was talking about honesty, the kind that costs something. Because here is the truth I had to sit with for a long time after that parking lot. I was not a victim of my wife's ingratitude. I was a participant in a system I helped build and never questioned. Every time I co-signed without documentation, every time I let my name stay off a deed I funded, every time I heard real father used as a compliment and didn't stop to ask what that made me, I was making a choice. Not a conscious one, but a choice. And choices compound. 14 years of small concessions become a parking lot at 8:30 on a Saturday night, holding a champagne glass with no one to clink it against. That is not a punishment from the universe. That is arithmetic. What you allow, you get more of. What you fund without naming, you eventually lose the right to claim. I'm not saying this to be hard on myself. I'm saying it because the only thing harder than living through it is watching someone else about to walk into the same door and not saying anything. Junior understood something I didn't give him enough credit for. He saw what happened at that grand opening and he felt the wrongness of it in real time. He just didn't act on it. He told me he was afraid of ruining the night. I understand that fear. I lived inside a version of it for 14 years. The fear of being the one who made things uncomfortable, who named the thing nobody wanted named, who insisted on being counted when the counting was inconvenient. That fear is how a man ends up 5 rows back at his own story. The intelligence I lacked was not financial or legal. David Park had the paperwork right the whole time. The intelligence I lacked was simpler and harder to acquire. I didn't know how to hold my own value at the same time I was extending it to someone else. I thought generosity meant making yourself small. It doesn't. Generosity means giving from a place that remains intact when the giving is done. And the grit, the part that took the longest, was not in calling the attorney. That call took 4 minutes. The grit was in not going back. In sitting in that sunroom with the loblolly pines and the cast-iron skillet and the rocking chair, I was re-gluing by myself and deciding that a quieter, smaller, truer life was not a consolation prize. It was the actual prize, the one I'd been circling for 14 years while I was busy financing someone else's dream of it. Junior called last week. He wanted to know if I was coming to Atlanta for his birthday. I told him I was thinking about it. He said, bring the cornbread. That's where we are now. Not fixed, not finished, but honest, which is the only foundation I know how to build on anymore. If you've been the one carrying the weight in a room that doesn't notice the weight, I'm not asking you to blow anything up. I'm asking you to write it down. Put a number on it. Look at the bottom of the page, not to be angry, to be clear. Because you cannot make a good decision from inside a fog you've convinced yourself is normal weather. Put down the champagne glass. Walk out to the parking lot. Start making calls.